So on your table of contents, you should have writing equivalent fractions and decimals or something of that sort. First, we'll start with just changing a terminating decimal. To change a terminating decimal to a simplified fraction, because we always want to give simplified fraction answers. We're going to put the value over the appropriate power of 10. Because when you read off that decimal, you're going to say a certain power of 10. It's got the word of. And simplify. So the hint here is to think of the decimal word form. How would you properly say the decimal? And that there tells you the fraction. So we might say 0.2 for that first one casually. You know, we're just chilling, hanging out. But if we were going to formally write that, what's the word form of this number here? Sir? 2/10. 2/10. And then what is 2/10 when we simplify it? 2/10 simplified is what, sir?
1/5.
1/5. We love simplifying. And that's it. That's all you got to do to change a terminating decimal to a simplified fraction. In math team, we do repeating decimals to simplified fractions. But right now, let's just stick with terminating fractions. For the next one, 0.16. That casual way to say that decimal. But what would be the proper word form, ma'am?
1600.
1600. So one strategy I did when I was a kid is I'd go, there's 2 decimal places, so I need 2 zeros in my denominator. Okay, 1600ths. What would that be when it's simplified? Sir? 4 25ths. Divide the numerator denominator by 4, you get 4 25ths. And then for the next one, 0.015. That's the casual way, but how would we properly say that number word form, ma'am? 15 thousandths. And then simplifying that's a little bit trickier. Some people might actually work off to the side to sort of make sure they have the proper number of zeros when they simplify it. What do you think when it's
I
simplified?
got 3 200.
3 over 200. 3 200. So the common errors that people make, it seems simple enough, but the common errors are people put the wrong power of 10 in the denominator, or they make an error with the simplifying step. So just be careful with those things. But it's fairly straightforward. But then the next part is going from a fraction to a decimal. Now there are some fractions that are fairly easy to turn into decimal. If they'd already said 3/10, I can just write 0.3. But if it said 3/5, I could change that into 6/10. So you can look for options where you can just change it into tenths, or change it into hundredths, or change it into thousandths. So if a fraction's denominator is a factor of a power of 10, the fraction can be converted to a decimal by making an equivalent fraction with a power of 10 in the denominator. And then you would read the new fraction properly to make the decimal. And there have been times where I've seen they give the non-simplified fraction first, and then to simplify the fraction, then you could build it back up into a tenth or a hundredth or what have you. So this first one, 3/20ths. Some people see that and go, oh, I'm going to make it into tenths. You cannot make 3/20ths into a whole number amount of denominator amount of tenths. So instead, we would take 3/20ths and we would change it into what? 3/20ths we would change into what? 1500. So times 5 times 5, we get 15 over 100. So what's 1500ths look like as a decimal? Yes, ma'am? 0.15. So tenths, hundredths. Make sure you go over the proper amount of spaces to get to that the decimal location that we need, the place value. What about 11/500ths? Again, some people might go, "Ooh, I'm gonna turn it into hundredths." You can't turn it into hundredths without making a complex fraction, and then that's just no fun. Well, it is kind of fun, but anyway. So instead, we're gonna do what with the numerator denominator way in the back? We're gonna multiply the numerator and denominator by 2 to get what equivalent fraction that I can read in here, the decimal equivalent. Ma'am? 22 thousandths. And then what does 22 thousandths look like as a decimal? Sir?
0.022.
22 needs ends in thousandths, so 0.022. But not all fractions are so easy. If I had 8/17, I cannot turn 17ths into tenths, hundredths, thousandths, and so on. So to change any fraction, I would not advise doing 8/17. I tried it once. I had to keep going up and down my board to try to make enough room before it finally repeated. But anyway, I do digress again. To change any fraction to a decimal, even the ones that we just did, we can divide the numerator by the denominator to make that happen. So on this one up here, we could have done 3 divided by 20, and we would have ended up with 0.15. This one we could have done 11 divided by 500, and we would have ended up with 0.022. So it's that whole idea of getting a decimal quotient. You have to make sure you're dividing in the correct order. 3 divided by 16. Which means when you set up the long division, which I suggest you do sideways as low as you can go. Okay, that apparently Safari doodad got in my way. When you set up your long division, your denominator is what is doing the dividing. 3 divided by 16. I had a student once who said, his tutor said, always put the smaller number on the outside. Not if your answer is going to be less than 1, you're not. So if it's a proper fraction like 3/16, when we do our first step of how many times does 16 go into 3, we should get an answer of what, children?
0.
0. Because it's going to be an answer of less than 1. So that's where we do the tacking on a decimal point and a 0. Now we get into the good stuff. How many times does 16 go into 30? 16 going into 30, I'm going to become an auctioneer here. Okay, I'm going to try to get some answers quick. 16 into 30, how many times?
1.
1 time, because 1 times 16 is what? What's 1 times 16? 1 times 16 is what? 16. And 30 minus 16. What's 30 minus 16? What do we get when we do 30 minus 16, ma'am? 14. So that means it didn't work out evenly, but sis doesn't have the LS because 14 isn't too high, so we bring down another 0. Now we got 140. How many times 16 going to 140 without going over? We're going to do an estimation possibly, but we don't know because maybe we're going to get it right on, maybe we're going to not get it right on, maybe we're going to have to fix it, we don't know. We think 5.
Wait, no.
How is that an estimate?
8.
7, 8, 9, 10. You're just going to keep giving me numbers? What do you want?
8.
8. We're going to try 8. We're going to do 16 times 8 over here. And we're going to see if this is going to yell at us when we get to the subtract step. So 8 times 6 is 48, 48, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 128, 128. Subtracted from 140. What's 140 minus 128? If we had said 9, we would have got too high, and then she would have yelled at us. But 128 subtracted from 140 gives us what?
12.
12. Didn't work out evenly, but it's not too high, since she didn't have to yell at us, so it was eventually a good guess. If we had said 7, we would have ended up with 28. No, yeah, something like that here. And sister would have, no, 38 maybe? Whatever. Sister would have yelled at us if we had said 7. Sister would have yelled at us if we had said 9. So we would have had to go back and guess with the 8. But now that we have 12 as the difference, we can bring down a 0. So how many times do you think 16 goes into 120, especially knowing what we now know about what 16 times 8 equals? That one shouldn't be too much of a challenge to make that guess, because we know what 16 times 8 equals, so we're going to say 16 times 7. So we want 7 16s to get less than 120. 16 times 7 over here, there's a 42, let's carry the 4, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 112. We should have all got 112. Oh, it still doesn't work out evenly. But the end is in sight if you predict what's going to happen next. How many times does 16 go into 80 without going over? 16 into 80 without going over? What do we think 16, how many times do you think 16 goes into 80 without going over? 5 times, because 5 times 16 is what? What's 5 times 16? 16 times 5, 16 times 5, 5 times 16? 80. Woo! And a lot of times people don't write this last step of the 80 because you see, oh, it's going to work out evenly, I'm good. And you go up here and you put it down, and that's fine, you don't have to. But there's something a little bit satisfying about putting that 80 and getting that remainder of 0, you know? But you don't have to. If you see that it's going to end up working out evenly on that last step, you don't have to write that last step. Alright, so 3/16 is equal to 0.1875. Hey, that's what I said there too. Alright, the next one we're going to do 17/8. Notice it's an improper fraction. Some people make the mixed number first and then just deal with converting the fraction part of it. But to make it a mixed number, you essentially have to do division anyway. So I typically just go ahead and just do 17 divided by 8. In this case, the 8 is going to go on the outside, and the 17 is going to go on the inside. Because it was an improper fraction, our answer is going to be greater than 1. Again, try to slide it as far down as you can. Because of those tacking on the zeros thing. How many times is 8 1 is 17 without going over? 8 to 17 as close as we can without going over is what? 2 times. Because 2 times 8 is what? What's 2 times 8? That's right. I mean, that's you as a 6th grade. What's 2 times 8? You should know what 2 times 8 is. Every single hand in this room should be up to 2 times 8. 2 times 8. Everybody should know 2 times 8. 2 times 8. What's 2 times 8, sir? 16. And we subtract 17 minus 16. What do we get when we do 17 minus 16? 17 minus 16, ma'am? 1. Didn't work out evenly. At this point, I have to put on the decimal point. Don't forget. Before I can tack on a 0 to bring down. 8 into 10. How many times 8 going to 10 without going over? 8 into 10 without going over. How many times, ma'am? 1 time. Because 1 times 8 is what? What's 1 times 8? 1 times 8. We get 1 times 8. We're going to go what? 8. And then 10 times 8. Oh, no, 10 minus 8. 10 minus 8. 10 minus 8. What do we get for 10 minus 8? 2. Ooh, in unison. And then we bring down another 0 because it still didn't work out evenly. 8 into 20. 8 into 20. How many times 8 going to 20 without going over? 8 into 20 without going over? 2 times. Because 2 times 8 is what? What's 2 times 8? 2 times 8. What is 2 times 8? 16. And we get 20 minus 16. Still not going to work out evenly just yet. 4. So bring down another 0. Oh, another 0. How many times 8 going to 40 without going over? 8 into 40 without going over? Yes, ma'am.
5.
And again, at that point, if you see nice, works out evenly, you don't have to write the last step, but you could. Because like I said, sometimes it's just satisfying to have that smiley face. Yay, worked out finally. Okay. Did everybody finish filling in those examples? Because now we're going to add one more level of complexity. Hold on. All right, if you've seen them out, you've already divided, so this is one more level of complexity you might encounter. When you're doing long division steps, the quotient's going to be a repeating decimal. So here's where that formatting is going to come into play. We got to make sure we know how to format repeating decimal. It's fine to just show it 2 or 3 times, but you wouldn't use the bar over it. You just do a dot, dot, dot. So that's a fine format to use. It's called an ellipse, the dot, dot, dot. Or you can use bar notation. And with bar notation, you would just write it 1 time with the bar over whatever repeats. And we're actually going to be changing the second example to be 3 over 22. So we're going to be changing that second example to be 3 over 22 to see a little bit more complexity with that bar notation. I just came up with it yesterday after making the photocopies, of course. For the first one, we got 2/9. I'm probably not going to do as much of the going through the division process with you because, well, time is of the essence. So we're going to divide 2 by 9. 2 divided by 9. We're going to say 9 goes into 2. It doesn't. That's a 0 decimal point. Decimal point up there. So now 9 goes into 20 2 times. You get 18. And when you subtract, you're going to get 2. So when you bring down another 0, you should say to yourself, self, I've already done how many times does 19 goes into 20? It goes in 2 times, and I get an 18. And then I get a 2, which means I bring down another 0, which means I get a 20, which means I get an 18, which means I get a 2, which means I get a 20, and an 18, and a 2, and a 20. And that's where the repeating happens. So 0.22 dot, 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 or just a single 2 with a bar over it. So the bar notation, you're supposed to write it just the 1 time. But now we're going to do something that ends up being a little bit more complex as far as the bar notation. 3 divided by 22. So make sure every single one of you change that second example to be over 22. So for this problem, 3 divided by 22 is the division we need to do. So 22's here, we got our 3 here. 22 goes into 3, not at all, 0, decimal point. 3 goes into, or 22 rather, goes into 30 one time. So I go ahead, 1 times 22 is 22, I subtract, I get 8. So I bring down another 0. And now 22 goes into 80, let's see, not 66, so 3 times. Because if I did 4 times, it would be 88. So 66, and then I subtract here, and I'm going to get 14, so it's just you didn't have to yell at me. So I bring down another 0. 22 goes into 140. I'm going to use a little bit of estimation, but I'm also going to use what I just found out. I found out that 3 times 22 is 66. So if I double 66, I'm going to get pretty close to 140. So I'm going to double the 3 and say it goes in about 6 times. 6 times 2 is 12, carry that, now I got 13, 132. So that when I subtract, I get 8. So now I'm going to bring down another 0. And at this point, when I say how many times is 22 going to 80, maybe something's going to ring a bell, maybe I'm not going to until I see it happen again. So it goes in the 3 times, that's 66, I subtract, I get 40, 140, wait a minute, I've done that. So this 80 repeated over here. So this answer would be 0.136, I ran out of room. 0.13636, dot, dot, dot. Notice the 1 didn't repeat though. So therefore, if I'm going to use the bar notation, I would do 0.136, and I would put the bar over the 3 and the 6. So you're going to go ahead and practice on the back side for a little bit.